our next unit, which is phylum Arthropoda. And as you guys can see in this picture, you see a picture of a tiger shrimp. You might, if you go to the coast, you might have seen a tiger shrimp in the Gulf of Mexico. It's actually an invasive species from Asia. We're not really sure how it got into the United States, but it is very damaging to our ecosystems because it's carnivorous, so it eats other shrimp, the local shrimp. So this is an example of an arthropoda. And so today we're going to be studying arthropodas. So some important characteristics that I would like you to know. As you can see, arthropodas are very similar to annelids. So if we follow our cladogram, look at this. So it has tissues, bilateral symmetry, body cavity, it has a coelom. They're both protostones and they both have segmentation. So they have all of these things in common. You can always look at your cladogram to follow the pattern on commonality between species. However, you notice here there is a separation, and the separation is that they have an exoskeleton. So these arthropodas have exoskeleton made out of chitin. Remember, chitin is a material that is also found in fungi. So they're coelomates, they're protostones, and they're segmented. And they have a shell. And believe it or not, these organisms are 70 to 85% of all the animals in the entire planet. So you're going to be, maybe you never thought about this, but you're going to be surprised how many animals actually fall under this category. All right, we're going to talk something about the main groups. So here we have crustaceans, and there's different types of crustaceans that you guys can see. There's another type of crustaceans that's not listed here, which would be the horseshoe crab, which we'll talk about later. There are arachnids. And arachnids, as you guys know, they're spiders. This is actually an eyelash mite. So you can imagine what that does. And so in arachnids, we have spiders, obviously, and scorpions. And then we have insects. So insects, there's a lot of organisms that fit here. They have there's more species of insects than any other species in the planet. There's 30 million types of species. So species include, these insects include beetles, as you can see a dung beetle here, the moths, flies, you see a mosquito here, bees, wasps, butterflies, right? So all of those are insects. And then also centipedes and millipedes. So if you can think about this, look, crustaceans are all pretty much oceanic for the most part, and then everything else is land organisms. So we have a good variety of organisms listed here. All right, I was gonna bring you a butterfly from my garden, but I was having a hard time catching it. I do have some of these zebra butterflies in my garden. This is the actual Florida state butterfly, zebra longwing. But I have a lot of monarchs because I have a lot of plants that monarchs like milkweed. So I think I will share a background picture with this butterfly next class. Okay, some of the characteristics of these organisms. So they are divided into segments. So you notice that they have a head. In the head, you can find the eyes, the mouth, and the antenna. So most, I want to say they all have antennas. You also have the thorax, which is the next part, And the thorax has three fused main segments, meaning if you notice here, there's like three folds. There's actually segments that hold different parts of the organism here. So you have the legs, and if the animal flies, you will have the wings attached to the thorax. And then you also have the abdomen, which holds the digestion and the reproduction, um, uh, the digestion and reproduction organs for the organism. It's usually in the posterior, and usually there are additional legs that are possibly attached to the abdomen depending on how many legs Arthropodas, the organism that we're talking about, has. So these organisms have something that we call jointed appendages. So think about, for example, your leg, right? Your leg has a joint in the knee that allows you to bend the knee. Imagine that you didn't have that joint there. Imagine yourself walking without being able to bend at the joint, or having no joints in your hands. Picking things up, walking, pretty much any task that we do would become very, very, very challenging. Same thing here. So the appendages are like the, we call it as a structure growing from the animal's body for feeding, mating, sensing, walking, or swimming. But it could be the legs, the arms, right? Those are appendages. They're like extensions from the body. And these are jointed. So you notice here where the bends are. These are why we call them the jointed limbs. And this was a really important evolution on this organism because outside of being bilateral, these jointed limbs, as you can imagine, allows these organisms to really be able to move very fluidly. So the joints add a significant amount of mobility. Another important thing that these animals possess is many of them is the ability to molt. So molting is an interesting phenomenon of basically the organism will grow a new outer shell. And the way that this works is there are glands that fill with fluid and moisten the current shell that they have. And so the shell, as is being moistened from the inside out, it becomes loose. And those glands at the same time of sending moisture are building a new shell underneath the one that is being released. So imagine if you have a lot of fluid, right? And if you have ice and your cup is really full, the cup can spill, the cup actually sweats. That's very similar to how this process of molting works. And the last thing is they have mandibles, which are basically little teeth or appendages in the front of the mouth to be able to process and digest and break down food. Okay, so here's one insect attacking the other. Okay, other characteristics. So we're going to talk about their respiratory system. So in aquatic animals, here's a crayfish that lives in water. And notice it has its appendages. It has additional claws here. And here's the antenna, right? These and the side of the crayfish, these are actual gills. Crayfish live in aquatic environments. So any aquatic arthropoda will have these gills. Interesting thing about the gills, I don't know if you notice that they're very large and they're like a large opening on the side of the organism. They are like that. They have a large surface area. That large surface area allows them to be able to go through gas exchange in water. So in water, they have to absorb the oxygen and they have to release carbon dioxide and they may have a high demand on that depending on how much oxygen is available for them underwater. So they need the more space area that there is for them to be able to absorb, the better it is for the organism. Now, if the organism is not aquatic, there's a few things that a few methods. All the organisms that are not aquatic have spiracles. And spiracles are um, openings in the side of the animal that allow the oxygen to come in. Now, once those openings are there, there are three different methods in which the air can travel. They can travel through tracheal tubes that you see. They're very tiny, skinny tubes here that basically allow the exchange, the airflow to come in and get transported through the wall throughout across the entire animal. So it travels very quickly throughout. These openings allow it to carry through surrounding the organism and up and around. So those are tracheal tubes. There's also body lungs. And scorpions and spiders don't have tracheal tubes, they have body lungs. So lungs allow the organism, they're little folded, I guess they look like folded, this is why it's called book lungs, because they look like folded pages or like pages of a book that line up on the sides of the organism, and the spiracle comes in through, and all these folded tubes allow the again, it has a high surface area and allows the air to travel in and travel through the animal. So those are the two methods: the tracheal tubes, which goes around the organism, and then the book lungs that go across. And those are specific for scorpions and spiders. Another characteristic is their eyes. So they have these sensory adaptations that are really cool. One of them is the eyes, and they usually typically have two very large eyes. This is not always the case. These large eyes they're called compound because they have they have multiple lenses inside one eye, and that causes the image to be blurry, but it allows them to react very quickly to motion. And this must be an adaptation because it allows them to escape when they detect movement. So imagine yourself trying to swat a fly, right? It's very challenging to do that when you have just with your hand, because they can react much faster than you can swat usually, and that's because of their compound eyes. Another interesting characteristic that many of these organisms have is pheromones. And pheromones are secreted chemicals that they send. They put an odor essentially, and this odor allows the organisms to sense with their antenna what they should be doing. So this is their communication. So they don't talk like you and I. Instead, with the pheromones, they secrete a chemical, and the different odors will tell them, okay, walk straight, pick up that piece, do this, do that, and it allows them to be able to work incredibly in teams. You might have seen this as a common sight for ants, where they line up straight and basically carry materials. And I have actually seen in Costa Rica ants that actually stand in a line and pass each other materials, like basically like a conveyor line that they're making. They grab it from one end and pass it to the other. It's pretty amazing how they work in unison. We have some really incredible different types of ants in Costa Rica that will destroy an entire tree in overnight because they communicate so well. So it's an interesting way of communication. Okay, so Horseshoe crabs, like I said,